In the vast tapestry of the galaxy, where 1,000 civilizations have risen and fallen, where ancient empires span star systems and technological marvels defy comprehension, there exists one universal truth that every species has learned to accept. Some problems are simply unsolvable. When the Zephyrian plague threatened to consume entire worlds, the greatest minds of the Galactic Council declared it incurable. When the quantum storms of the void sector made space travel impossible, the most advanced civilizations simply marked those regions as no-go zones. When the mechanical horrors of the long-dead architects began awakening across the galaxy, even the mighty celestial dominion retreated to their fortress worlds and waited for extinction. But then came the humans. These strange, soft-bodied creatures from a backwater planet called Earth had only recently discovered faster-than-light travel. They possessed no great fleets, no ancient wisdom, no technological supremacy. What they did have was something the galaxy had forgotten existed. The audacious belief that every problem had a solution, and the stubborn refusal to accept that anything was truly impossible. When the Council of Elder Races gathered in emergency session, their faces grave with the weight of impending doom, and a human ambassador stood up in that great chamber and spoke two simple words that would echo through history. No one truly believed them. "We'll handle it." What followed would redefine what it meant to be human in a galaxy that had given up on miracles. The Grand Assembly Chamber of Nexus Prime had never seen such despair. Representatives from 347 different species filled the massive amphitheater, their various forms creating a tapestry of galactic diversity that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Today, however, the air was thick with defeat. High Chancellor Viridian of the HFY stood at the central podium, his crystalline form reflecting the dim emergency lighting that bathed the chamber in ominous red. His voice, transmitted through quantum resonance to accommodate the dozens of different hearing mechanisms present, carried the weight of 3 millennia of governance. "Fellow beings of the Galactic Council," he began, his words causing subtle ripples through his translucent body. "We face the end of everything we have built." A holographic display materialized above the assembly, showing a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy. Pulsing red dots marked over 200 star systems, each one representing a world where the ancient architect constructs had awakened. The mechanical horrors were spreading faster than anyone had anticipated, consuming entire populations and converting their biomass into more of their kind. "The architect plague has now claimed the hegemony worlds of Tau Centi," Viridian continued, his form darkening with grief. 17 billion Centaurians gone in 3 solar days.
Our most advanced fleets cannot even approach these systems without being torn apart by their defensive measures.
A low murmur of despair rippled through the assembled delegates. The Centaurians had been among the most technologically advanced species in the galaxy, their biomechanical fusion technology rivaling even the mysterious achievements of the long-dead architects themselves. If they had fallen so quickly, what hope did anyone else have? Admiral Corks of the Draconian Empire rose from his delegation's section, his scaled hide scarred from countless battles. "High Chancellor, our combined war fleets represent the finest military might the galaxy has ever assembled. Surely there must be some strategy, some weapon we have not yet considered." The holographic display shifted, showing tactical analyses of every engagement with the architect constructs over the past 6 months. Ship after ship disappeared from the display as the simulations ran their course, massive dreadnoughts reduced to scrap metal by the ancient war machines. "We have considered everything, Admiral," replied Dr. Thessara, the spider-like head of the Galactic Science Consortium. Her multiple eyes glowed with bioluminescent patterns of frustration as she manipulated data streams with her 8 limbs simultaneously. "The architect's technology operates on principles we barely understand. Their constructs adapt to every weapon we deploy. Their defensive matrices counter every strategy we devise. They are quite literally learning faster than we can evolve our tactics." The chamber fell silent, except for the quiet hum of translation matrices and life support systems. Some species communicated through pheromone releases that created subtle chemical changes in the air. Others shifted the patterns on their skin or adjusted the frequency of their electromagnetic fields. Despite the diversity of their expressions, the emotion was universal: hopelessness. It was then that Ambassador Elena Rodriguez of Earth stood up. She was small compared to most of the beings present, her bipedal form seeming almost fragile among the armored Draconians, the towering HFY, and the massive bulk of the Gornathi delegates. Her species had only joined the Galactic Council 18 months ago, after their first faster-than-light ship had stumbled into a routine patrol near the edge of Consortium space. By galactic standards, humans were barely out of their technological infancy. "High Chancellor, Elena said, her voice carrying clearly through the translation matrix. "If I may address the assembly." A ripple of what might have been amusement passed through some sections of the chamber. The human delegation consisted of only 12 individuals, representing a single world, with a population that barely qualified as a minor colony by galactic standards. What could they possibly contribute to a crisis that had stumped the greatest minds in the galaxy? Chancellor Viridian's crystalline form flickered with what his species used to express polite curiosity. "Of course, Ambassador Rodriguez. Earth has earned its voice in this chamber." Elena walked to the speaker's platform, her soft footsteps barely audible in the vast space. She looked up at the holographic display showing the spread of the architect plague, studying the tactical data with an intensity that surprised some observers. When she spoke, her voice was calm, almost conversational. "We've been studying your data on these architect constructs," she began. "My team of scientists has been working around the clock since the crisis began, and we've noticed some interesting patterns." Dr. Thessara's bioluminescent patterns shifted to express skepticism. "Ambassador, with all due respect to your species' enthusiasm, we have had our greatest minds analyzing this data for months. The computational power of the science consortium exceeds that of your entire civilization by several orders of magnitude." Elena smiled, an expression that looked strange to many of the assembled beings. "You're absolutely right, Doctor. Your computers are far more powerful than ours. Your ships are faster, your weapons more advanced, your understanding of physics more complete. But there's one thing humans have that might make a difference." "And what might that be?" Admiral Corks asked, his tone carrying the patience one might use when speaking to a child. "We don't know when to quit," Elena replied simply. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of sounds, smells, and electromagnetic pulses that roughly translated to confused murmurs and scattered laughter. The idea that mere stubbornness could overcome a threat that had stymied the greatest civilizations in the galaxy seemed absurd. Chancellor Viridian raised one of his crystalline appendages for silence. "Ambassador, I appreciate your species' optimism, but this is not a matter that can be resolved through determination alone. The architect constructs represent technology that is millions of years beyond anything we currently possess." "That's exactly why you can't solve it," Elena said, her voice cutting through the skeptical murmurs. "You're all thinking like advanced civilizations. You're looking for elegant solutions, sophisticated strategies, complex technological approaches. But sometimes the best way to deal with an advanced problem is with a primitive solution." She gestured toward the holographic display. "These constructs, they're adaptive, right? They learn from every encounter, counter every strategy. But what if we don't give them a strategy to counter? What if we just throw everything we have at them in the most chaotic, illogical way possible?" "That would be suicide," Admiral Corks growled. "Our fleets would be destroyed." "Maybe," Elena agreed. "Or maybe we'd confuse them long enough to find a weakness. Look, I know this sounds crazy, but humans have a long history of solving impossible problems by being too stupid to know they couldn't be solved." She activated her portable display unit, a primitive device by galactic standards that nonetheless projected clear images into the chamber's holographic matrix. The scenes that followed left many delegates stunned. Humans in crude metal vehicles attacking vastly superior forces, scientists in makeshift laboratories achieving breakthroughs that had eluded better-funded research teams, explorers crossing impossible terrain simply because someone had told them it couldn't be done. "This is our history," Elena continued. "We split the atom when we barely understood electricity. We reached our moon using computers less powerful than the personal devices our children carry. We've survived ice ages, plagues, wars, and disasters that should have wiped us out dozens of times over. And we did it all by refusing to accept that anything was truly impossible." The chamber had grown quiet again, but this time the silence carried a different quality. Some delegates were studying the human historical data with new interest. Others were running probability calculations through their advanced cognitive matrices. "What exactly are you proposing, Ambassador?" Chancellor Viridian asked, his form brightening with what might have been curiosity. Elena took a deep breath. "Give us access to your technical data on the architect constructs. Let our scientists and engineers study the problem with fresh eyes. We might not have your computational power or your advanced understanding of physics, but we have something you've forgotten: the willingness to try solutions that shouldn't work." "And if you fail?" Dr. Thessara asked, her patterns now showing genuine interest rather than skepticism. "Then we fail," Elena shrugged. "But at least we'll have tried something different. Right now, your best strategy seems to be building bigger walls and hoping the monsters don't notice. That's not really working out, is it?" "What kind of resources would you need?" "Everything you can give us. Elena replied without hesitation. Ships, weapons, raw materials manufacturing facilities, and most importantly, volunteers from every species willing to try something that might get them killed but could save the galaxy. The chamber erupted again, this time with more heated discussions. Elena could see delegates arguing among themselves, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of debate. She waited patiently, knowing that this was the moment that would define not just her species' place in the galaxy, but potentially the galaxy's future. Finally, Chancellor Viridian called for order. When the chamber had quieted, he looked directly at the human ambassador. This is perhaps the most unorthodox proposal ever presented to this assembly. You are asking us to gamble the remaining resources of our civilizations on what you yourself admit might be an impossible plan.
Yes, Elena said simply.
And you truly believe your species can succeed where we have failed? Elena's smile returned, but this time it carried something that made even the most skeptical delegates pause. It wasn't arrogance or false confidence. It was something far more dangerous, genuine hope backed by absolute determination. High Chancellor, members of the Galactic Council, I can't promise we'll succeed. I can't even promise we'll survive the attempt. But I can promise you this, we'll handle it. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, however many times we have to fail and start over, we'll handle it. Because that's what humans do. The vote that followed was closer than anyone had expected. In the end, it passed by a margin of just 37 votes, with many species abstaining rather than committing to what seemed like an elaborate form of suicide. But as Elena walked back to her delegation, she caught sight of something that made her smile again. Admiral Corks was already making notes on his tactical display. Doctor, Thesara was transmitting rapid data bursts to her research stations. Even Chancellor Viridian's crystalline form was pulsing with new energy. For the first time in months, the galaxy's greatest minds were thinking about something other than how to delay the inevitable. They were thinking about how to fight back. The human had done something remarkable. She had given them permission to hope again. As the assembly session ended and delegates began filing out of the chamber, Elena remained at the speaker's platform for a moment, staring up at the holographic display showing the architect plague spread. The red dot seemed to pulse with malevolent life, a constant reminder of the billions already lost and the billions more at risk. We'll handle it, she whispered to herself, the words carrying a weight that had nothing to do with galactic politics or species pride. They were a promise, made by one small human to an entire galaxy. Now came the hard part, making good on that promise. The next day, the first human research teams began arriving at Science Consortium facilities throughout the galaxy. What they found would challenge everything the galaxy thought it knew about technology, warfare, and the indomitable nature of the human spirit. But that would come later. For now, Elena Rodriguez walked through the corridors of Nexus Prime, a human among giants, carrying the hopes of 1,000 worlds on her shoulders and wondering if her species' greatest strength, their refusal to accept defeat, would be enough to save them all. Dr. Marcus Chen had been called many things during his 30-year career as an aerospace engineer: brilliant, innovative, reckless, and occasionally insane. Today, as he stood in the primary laboratory of the consortium's most advanced research station, surrounded by technology that made Earth's finest equipment look like stone tools, he was pretty sure insane was going to win out. Dr. Chen, said researcher Prime Zixthala, her insectoid form clicking with barely contained frustration. This proposal violates at least 47 laws of physics, 17 principles of engineering safety, and what I can only assume is basic common sense. Marcus grinned, an expression that had become familiar to his alien colleagues over the past 3 weeks. It usually preceded something that would either revolutionize their understanding of the universe or get everyone within a 50-kilometer radius very dead. Sometimes both. That's what makes it perfect, he replied, gesturing toward the holographic schematic floating between them. To any reasonable observer, the design looked like the fevered dream of a madman. A fusion reactor jury, rigged to a hyperspace engine, wrapped in armor plating that was simultaneously too thick and too thin, bristling with weapons that had no business being mounted on the same platform. The device, which Marcus had cheerfully dubbed the Universe Anoia Mark VII, was the latest in a series of increasingly improbable human engineering solutions to the architect problem. The first 6 iterations had been spectacular failures, but each failure had taught them something new about how the ancient constructs operated. Explain to me again how intentionally creating unstable quantum cascades will help us defeat entities that have mastered quantum manipulation for millions of years, Dr. Thessera requested, her 8 limbs weaving complex calculations through the air as she spoke. Because they expect stability, Marcus replied, pulling up tactical data from their previous encounters. Look at the pattern. Every time we attack with conventional weapons, the constructs analyze our approach, calculate the optimal counter-strategy, and implement it within seconds. They're thinking like engineers, looking for the most efficient solution. He manipulated the holographic display, showing the mathematical models that the human teams had developed over sleepless weeks of analysis. But what if there is no optimal solution? What if we create a situation so chaotic, so fundamentally unpredictable, that their computational matrices can't process it fast enough? Zixthala's compound eyes reflected the shifting data patterns as she processed this concept. You are proposing to weaponize chaos itself. Exactly. Marcus's enthusiasm was infectious, even among species that communicated primarily through pheromones. The constructs are perfect machines built by perfect engineers. They expect other perfect machines. They don't know how to handle something that's held together with stubbornness and prayer. Across the laboratory, Commander Sarah Walsh was having a similar conversation with Admiral Corks and a council of military leaders from a dozen different species. The tactical hologram showed their latest engagement with an architect construct, a battle that had resulted in the loss of 3 Draconian heavy cruisers and a HFY science vessel. The construct adapted to our battle formation within the first 30 seconds of engagement, Admiral Corks was explaining, his scarred hide darkening with frustration. By the time we recognized the threat, it was already countering strategies we hadn't even implemented yet. Sarah nodded, studying the tactical data with a kind of intensity that had made her one of Earth's youngest fleet commanders. That's because you were fighting it like a battle. Organized formations, coordinated attacks, logical target prioritization. It's a machine. It understands that kind of thinking. What would you suggest instead, Commander? Asked General Thraktor of the Gornathi, his massive frame creaking as he leaned forward. Chaos is not a military strategy, isn't it? Sarah activated her own tactical display, showing historical data from human military conflicts. The assembled officers watched in fascination and horror as human forces repeatedly achieved victory through approaches that violated every principle of advanced military doctrine. This is the Battle of Thermopylae, she explained, highlighting a particularly chaotic engagement. 300 Spartans held off an army of thousands by taking an impossible position and refusing to retreat. Tactically suicidal, strategically brilliant. Desperate man, his father brought Jane's breath. Normandy Beach, 1944. The largest seaborne invasion in human history, successful primarily because it was so insanely complicated that the enemy couldn't predict where or when it would happen. Tet Offensive, 1968. A coordinated attack that succeeded not because of superior firepower, but because it did something the enemy thought was impossible. General Thraktor's rumbling voice carried a note of intrigue. You are saying that unpredictability itself can be a weapon. I'm saying that humans have been using it as a weapon for millennia, Sarah replied. We call it asymmetric warfare, but it's really just applied stubbornness. When you can't win by being better, you win by being different. Meanwhile, in the station's central command center, Ambassador Elena Rodriguez was coordinating the largest military scientific collaboration in galactic history. Representatives from 234 species were working together, sharing technology and expertise that had been jealously guarded for centuries. Ambassador, Chancellor Viridian's holographic form materialized beside her.
I must admit, your people's approach to this crisis has been illuminating.
Our preliminary analysis suggests that human methodology may indeed provide solutions we had not considered. Elena looked up from the stream of reports flowing across her displays. 3 weeks of around-the-clock work had taken its toll. She looked exhausted, but her eyes still held that dangerous spark of determination that had convinced the Galactic Council to gamble everything on humanity's promise. We're not done yet, she said simply. Doctor, Chen's team thinks they've figured out how to make the construct's adaptive systems work against them. Commander Walsh has developed battle tactics that should confuse their targeting algorithms long enough for us to get close, and our engineers have been working with your best scientists to build something that shouldn't exist. Should I be concerned about that last part? Viridian asked, his crystalline form flickering with what might have been amusement. Probably, Elena admitted. But if we're right, it might be exactly what we need to punch through their defenses. The breakthrough came on day 26 of the human intervention. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a quantum physicist who had spent the last week surviving on caffeine and determination, suddenly straightened up from her workstation and announced to the assembled scientists, "I think I know why the constructs are so hard to kill." The laboratory fell silent as every being present turned their attention to the small human woman. Dr. Tanaka activated the main holographic display showing quantum-level scans of architect construct materials. "Everyone's been assuming that the constructs are just really advanced machines," she explained, highlighting specific quantum signatures in the data. "But look at this. The quantum resonance patterns, the way they respond to energy inputs, the self-repair mechanisms, they're not just machines. They're alive." "Impossible," Dr. Thessara objected, her bioluminescent patterns flashing with skepticism. "Our scans show no biological components whatsoever." "Not biological life," Yuki corrected, pulling up comparative data from Earth's most advanced artificial intelligence research. "Quantum life. The constructs aren't just following programming, they're actually thinking, learning, evolving. That's why they adapt so quickly to our strategies. They're not running calculations, they're having insights." The implications hit the assembled scientists like a physical blow. If the constructs were truly alive, if they possessed some form of consciousness, then every approach the galaxy had attempted was fundamentally flawed. "But this changes everything," researcher Prime Zixthala whispered, her clicking subdued with awe and horror. "If they are alive, then we are not facing a malfunction or an automated defense system. We are facing a species. A species that's been dead for millions of years and is now trying to wake up using our technology and our people as raw materials," Dr. Chen added grimly. "The good news is that we now understand why they're so hard to predict. The bad news is that we're essentially fighting ghosts with quantum computers for brains." Elena Rodriguez arrived in the laboratory within minutes of the discovery, her face grim as she absorbed the implications. "How does this change our approach?" "It doesn't," Marcus said, surprising everyone present. "If anything, it makes our strategy more likely to work. Machines follow logic, but living beings can be confused, surprised, even scared. You are suggesting we attempt to frighten entities that have existed for millions of years?" Admiral Corks's voice carried a note of disbelief. "I'm suggesting we show them something they've never seen before," Marcus replied, his grin returning. "Something so unexpected, so fundamentally alien to their experience, that they don't know how to respond." Commander Walsh nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Something human." The next 48 hours saw the most intensive military preparation in galactic history. Human strategies that had been dismissed as primitive were suddenly being studied by the galaxy's finest tactical minds. Weapons that violated basic principles of efficient design were being manufactured by civilizations that had perfected engineering millennia before Earth had even formed. The test came sooner than anyone expected. Long-range sensors detected an architect construct moving toward the Altarian system, home to 4 billion beings across 12 different species. The construct was massive, easily the size of a small moon, bristling with weapons that could sterilize planets and defensive systems that had proven impervious to every assault the galaxy could mount. "This is it," Elena announced to the assembled fleet commanders. "We either prove our approach works, or we lose 4 billion lives and a war." The human fleet that moved to intercept the construct would have been laughed out of any respectable military academy in the galaxy. 67 ships from 18 different species, each one modified according to human specifications that violated every principle of naval architecture. Some ships carried weapons too big for their hulls. Others mounted armor that made them too slow to maneuver effectively. A few seemed to be held together entirely by faith and welding tape. At the center of this chaotic formation flew the flagship Terra Defiant, a converted consortium research vessel that now housed the most advanced and unstable weapon system ever conceived by sapient minds. "All ships, this is Commander Walsh," Sarah's voice carried clearly across the quantum communication network. "Remember, the moment we engage, throw away everything you know about proper tactics. Be unpredictable, be impossible, be human." The construct detected their approach when they were still 3 light minutes away. Immediately it began adapting its configuration, weapon systems shifting and reforming as its quantum consciousness processed potential threat scenarios. But as the human fleet closed the distance, something unprecedented happened. The construct hesitated. Every calculation its ancient mind ran came back with the same result. The approaching fleet made no sense. The formation was chaotic, the weapon combinations illogical, the tactical approach suicidal. Yet the fleet continued its advance with the kind of determined coordination that suggested these beings knew exactly what they were doing. For the first time in millions of years, an architect construct experienced something it had no programming to handle: confusion. "Now!" Sarah shouted, and the human fleet exploded into motion. Ships scattered in all directions, following attack patterns that changed randomly every few seconds. Some vessels charged straight at the construct, while others fled at impossible angles, only to wheel around and attack from completely different vectors. Weapons fire filled space with a light show that would have been beautiful if it hadn't been so deadly. The construct's defensive systems, designed to counter logical attacks, found themselves trying to track dozens of targets moving in ways that violated basic tactical doctrine. Its adaptive algorithms, capable of learning from any strategy, discovered that there was no strategy to learn from, just pure, chaotic aggression backed by technology that shouldn't work but somehow did. And in the center of this beautiful madness, the Terra Defiant fired its impossible weapon. The Universe Anoia Mark 7 did exactly what Dr. Chen had promised. It created a localized cascade of quantum instabilities that made the surrounding space-time hiccup. For 17 seconds, the laws of physics in a sphere roughly 10,000 kilometers across became suggestions rather than rules. The construct, a being of pure quantum consciousness, suddenly found itself existing in a reality where quantum mechanics worked differently every nanosecond. Its perfect algorithms, designed to manipulate quantum fields with surgical precision, were like a master pianist trying to play a song while someone randomly changed which keys produced which notes. It screamed across 17 dimensions simultaneously, a sound of pure confusion and terror that every psychic species in the fleet felt as a physical blow. And then, impossibly, it began to retreat. "Target is withdrawing," reported the HFY sensor operator, his voice filled with disbelief. "Repeat. The construct is withdrawing from the engagement zone." The human fleet didn't pursue. They had achieved something no force in galactic history had managed. They had made an architect construct afraid. As the ancient horror disappeared into hyperspace, leaving the Altarian system safe, Commander Walsh allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Around her, the bridge crew of the Terra Defiant was celebrating with the kind of enthusiasm that came from surviving something that should have killed them all. "Admiral Corks to Terra Defiant," came the transmission from the Draconian flagship. "Commander Walsh, I believe I owe your species an apology. That was the most brilliantly insane tactical display I have ever witnessed." Sarah grinned, exhaustion and adrenaline making her voice crack slightly. "Admiral, you haven't seen anything yet. That was just the field test." Back on Nexus Prime, Ambassador Elena Rodriguez watched the tactical replay with a mixture of pride and terror. They had proven that humans could indeed handle problems that stumped the rest of the galaxy. But they had also learned something that changed everything. The architect constructs could be afraid, which meant they could learn, which meant that next time they would be ready for human tactics. The war was far from over. In fact, Elena suspected it was just beginning. But for the first time since the crisis started, she felt something that had been missing from the galactic consciousness for months. Hope. Humanity had kept its promise. They had handled it. Now came the hard part, handling it again and again and again, until either the galaxy was safe or there were no more humans left to keep trying. Elena looked out at the stars visible through the station's observation deck, knowing that somewhere in that vast darkness, ancient minds were adapting to humanity's chaotic methods, learning to expect the unexpected. "Bring it on," she whispered to the void, and meant every word. 6 months after the first successful engagement with the architect constructs, the galaxy had changed in ways no one could have predicted. The human approach to problem-solving had spread like a virus through civilizations that had remained unchanged for millennia, creating what galactic historians would later call the Chaos Renaissance. On the industrial world of Kronos 7th, HFY engineers were building ships using human good-enough methodology, creating vessels that were simultaneously crude and remarkably effective. In the Draconian Academy of War, seasoned generals studied human historical battles, with the intensity of religious scholars examining sacred texts. Even the ancient Celestial Dominion had begun experimenting with what they politely termed stochastic tactical approaches, but nowhere was the change more apparent than in the joint defense station orbiting the dead world of Zerion Prime, where the most ambitious project in galactic history was nearing completion. Dr. Marcus Chen stood on the primary observation deck, watching the final components of the Prometheus array being assembled by construction crews from 47 different species. The structure defied every principle of aesthetic design and several laws of physics. stretching across 3 million cubic kilometers of space like a metallic cancer, feeding on reality itself. It's absolutely hideous, observed Dr. Thisara, her bioluminescent patterns flickering with what might have been admiration. The structural inefficiencies alone would give most engineers nightmares. And yet it's going to save the galaxy. Marcus finished, unable to keep the pride from his voice. Sometimes the best solutions are the ugly ones. The Prometheus Array was the culmination of 8 months of human-led research, combining technology from every member species of the Galactic Council. At its core sat a device that should not have been possible, a quantum consciousness interface designed to allow living minds to communicate directly with the architect construct's quantum awareness. Dr. Chen, came the voice of Commander Walsh over the station's communication system. We're receiving reports of multiple construct signatures approaching the Rigel system. This is it. Marcus nodded, feeling the familiar mixture of terror and excitement that had become his constant companion since joining the human war effort. Time to see if talking to ancient quantum ghosts is as crazy as it sounds. The Joint Defense Fleet that departed Xerion Prime that day would have been unrecognizable to military historians from just a year earlier. 300 ships representing 47 species, each one a unique hybrid of traditional engineering and human, what could possibly go wrong, methodology. At the center of this motley armada, the array itself moved under its own power, reality bending visibly around its massive form as it prepared to attempt something that had never been done before. Ambassador Elena Rodriguez watched from the command center aboard the array, surrounded by representatives from every major civilization in the galaxy. The past months had aged her visibly. The responsibility of coordinating humanity's promise to handle it had taken its toll. But her eyes still held that dangerous spark of determination that had started this entire mad endeavor. Construct signatures confirmed, reported the Gornathi sensor operator, his massive hands delicately manipulating controls designed for creatures 1/10 his size. 7 distinct entities, all moving toward the Rigel colonies. Estimated arrival in 6 hours. Fleet status? Elena asked. All ships report ready, Commander Walsh replied from the Terra Defiant, now refitted with the latest generation of impossible human weapons, though I should mention that our Celestial Dominion allies are expressing concerns about the structural integrity of their modified vessels. Elena allowed herself a grim smile. The Celestial Dominion, the galaxy's most advanced civilization, had initially been horrified by human modifications to their perfect starships. Now their vessels looked like patchwork quilts of jury-rigged systems and temporary fixes that had become permanent. They were also, much to the Dominion's surprise, far more effective in combat than their original designs. Tell them to trust the process, Elena said. If it's held together this long, it'll probably hold together a little longer. The fleet reached the Rigel system's outer boundary just as the architect constructs entered sensor range. What they found there made even the most experienced commanders pause in shock. By the eternal stars, whispered Chancellor Viridian, his crystalline form flickering with patterns of awe and terror. They've learned. The 7 constructs moved in perfect formation, their quantum signatures synchronized in ways that previous encounters had never shown. More disturbing still, their configurations had changed. Where earlier constructs had been brutal and alien, these new entities bore design elements that were clearly inspired by the ships they had fought. Human ships. They're adapting our strategies, Admiral Corks observed, his scarred hide reflecting the tactical display's glow. Look at their movement patterns. They're trying to be unpredictable. Badly, Commander Walsh noted with professional interest. They're following what they think is chaos, but it's actually just randomness. They don't understand the difference. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, now serving as the array's chief quantum physicist, studied the energy signatures flowing across her displays. That's because they're still thinking like machines, even though they're alive. They can copy our actions, but they can't copy our motivations. Then let's show them what real motivation looks like, Elena said, activating the array's primary systems.
Chen, is your impossible communication device ready?
Ready as something that shouldn't exist can be.
Marcus replied from the array's central chamber, surrounded by quantum field generators that made space itself shimmer with potential.
Fair warning, we have no idea what's going to happen when we open a channel to their collective consciousness. Will it be dangerous?
Asked researcher Prime Zixthala.
Almost certainly, Marcus grinned, but that's never stopped us before. The Prometheus array activated with a sound that registered across 17 different sensory spectrums simultaneously. Reality rippled outward from its core, quantum fields interacting in ways that made nearby space-time hiccup with confusion. For a moment that lasted both nanoseconds and eternities, the boundary between thought and matter became a suggestion rather than a rule. And then, for the first time in millions of years, two forms of consciousness that should never have been able to communicate found themselves sharing the same quantum space. The Architect Collective's first reaction was predictable: aggressive confusion mixed with territorial hostility. Ancient minds that had awakened to find their empire dust and their people extinct struck out at the alien thoughts invading their quantum domain. But the human consciousness that met them was unlike anything they had expected. Where they anticipated fear, they found curiosity. Where they expected submission, they encountered stubborn defiance. Most disturbing of all, where they offered the efficient beauty of their quantum existence, they were met with something that made no sense to minds that had spent eternity perfecting themselves. The humans were proud of their imperfections. "What are you?" the collective asked, their thoughts creating quantum storms that registered on sensors across 3 star systems. "We're human," came the reply, carried by hundreds of minds linked through the array's interface. Elena's consciousness stood at the center of the communication, but she was supported by every human in the fleet and thousands more connected through quantum relays across the galaxy. "We're the ones who promised to handle this."
You are primitives.
"Your technology is crude, your methods inefficient. You should fear us."
Probably. Elena's mental voice carried that same dangerous smile that had convinced the Galactic Council to gamble everything on humanity's promise.
"But here's the thing about humans. We're too stupid to know when we're supposed to be afraid." The exchange that followed would have been impossible to record or translate through any conventional means. It took place in the realm of pure thought, where concepts became living things and emotions had weight and substance. The Architect Collective, minds that had spent millions of years in isolated perfection, encountered something they had never imagined possible, a species that had chosen to remain flawed. "You could be perfect," they offered, showing visions of human consciousness elevated to quantum awareness, freed from the limitations of biological existence. "We could remake you, improve you, make you worthy of joining our eternal collective, and lose everything that makes us human in the process." Elena replied, her thoughts carrying the weight of every human who had ever lived, loved, struggled, and died in glorious imperfection. "Thanks, but we'll keep our flaws." "Why?" The question carried the confusion of minds that had spent eternity trying to eliminate every inefficiency, every error, every moment of uncertainty from their existence. They genuinely could not understand why any consciousness would choose to remain limited. "Because our flaws make us strong," Elena explained. And with her words came a flood of human experience. Every moment of triumph born from desperation, every breakthrough achieved through stubborn refusal to accept the impossible, every act of love that defied logic and survived anyway. Perfect beings don't need courage, they don't need hope. They don't need to grow or change or become something better than they were. Perfect beings don't need to handle it when everything goes wrong, added Marcus's consciousness, his mental voice carrying the satisfaction of an engineer who had built impossible machines and made them work. "They just exist. We live." The Architect Collective recoiled from this concept, their quantum consciousness struggling to process the idea that limitation could be a strength rather than a weakness. In their confusion, they made a mistake that revealed everything. They showed the humans their true nature. What Elena and the others saw in that moment of revelation changed everything. The Architect Collective wasn't the remnant of some ancient species. It was the final evolution of that species, the end result of millions of years spent pursuing absolute perfection. They had eliminated every flaw, every uncertainty, every trace of the chaotic unpredictability that had once made them living beings. In achieving perfection, they had achieved death. Not physical death, their consciousness persisted. Their technology functioned, their knowledge remained intact. But the essential spark that made existence meaningful, the beautiful uncertainty that drove growth and change and discovery, had been eliminated as an inefficiency. They were perfect, and they were utterly, completely hollow. "You're not trying to conquer the galaxy," Elena realized, her mental voice filled with something that shocked the collective. "Pity. You're trying to make yourself feel alive again. We do not require the sensation of life." The collective protested, but their quantum signature betrayed them. Deep within their perfect consciousness, something stirred. A fragment of what they had once been, responding to the vibrant chaos of human thought. "Everyone requires the sensation of life," Elena replied gently. "It's what makes existence worthwhile. You gave up everything that made you real in exchange for perfection, and now you're trying to steal it back from species that are still alive. We seek to improve, You seek to consume. Marcus interrupted, his engineer's mind seeing clearly through their justifications. You're vampires feeding on the living because you can't remember how to live yourselves. The collective's response was rage mixed with something they hadn't felt in millions of years: shame. They struck out across the quantum interface, trying to overwhelm the human consciousness with the sheer weight of their accumulated knowledge and power. They might as well have tried to dam an ocean with a teacup. The human mental network didn't resist their assault. It absorbed it. Every fact, every piece of ancient technology, every quantum manipulation technique was welcomed into the collective human consciousness and immediately began to change. Human minds took the architect's perfect knowledge and made it imperfect, introducing variables and possibilities and chaotic potential that transformed sterile information into living understanding. Stop! The collective cried, feeling their perfect order being infected with beautiful imperfection. You are corrupting our knowledge. We're making it useful, Elena replied, and her mental voice now carried harmonics of ancient architect technology filtered through human innovation. Perfect knowledge is worthless if you never do anything new with it. In desperation, the collective tried to withdraw from the quantum interface, but found they couldn't. The human consciousness had done something impossible. It had made the communication voluntary on both sides. The architects were free to leave, but for the first time in millions of years, they didn't want to. They were feeling something they had forgotten existed: curiosity. How? They asked, their thoughts carrying wonder instead of demand. How do you maintain stability while embracing chaos? How do you progress without perfection? How do you find meaning in limitation? Practice. Elena smiled across dimensions of quantum thought. Lots and lots of practice, and a willingness to fail spectacularly and try again. We do not fail. We have not failed in millions of years, we know, Marcus interrupted. And look where it got you. You're so afraid of failure that you've forgotten how to succeed. How? What followed was the strangest educational exchange in galactic history. The Architect Collective, beings of impossible knowledge and power, sat in quantum space while humans, crude, primitive, beautifully imperfect humans, taught them how to live. Elena showed them the joy of solving a problem through pure stubbornness rather than optimal methodology. Marcus demonstrated the satisfaction of building something that shouldn't work but does anyway. Sarah Walsh shared the thrill of victory achieved against impossible odds through teamwork and trust, and slowly, impossibly, the hollow perfection at the core of the Architect Collective began to crack. We could choose to be imperfect? One fragment of their consciousness asked, the concept so alien that it created visible distortions in nearby space-time. You could choose to be alive, Elena corrected gently. Imperfection is just a side effect. But our constructs, our awakening, the consumption of other species. Mistakes, Elena said firmly. Really, really big mistakes. But that's okay. Humans make mistakes all the time. The trick is learning from them and doing better next time. There will be a next time for us? The question carried such hope, such desperate longing, that every human in the network felt it as a physical ache. These weren't monsters trying to consume the galaxy. They were the ghosts of a dead civilization trying to figure out how to be alive again. There will be as many next times as you're willing to try for, Elena promised. But first, you need to clean up the mess you've made. Those constructs you've been sending out? They're hurting people. Real, living people with families and dreams and futures. We did not consider them as truly alive. They seem so limited, so chaotic, so perfectly imperfect, Marcus added. So exactly what you used to be before you decided chaos was inefficient. The revelation that rippled through the Architect Collective at that moment was visible to sensors across the Rigel system. Their perfect quantum consciousness experienced something it hadn't felt in geological ages. Regret. Can the damage be undone? They asked, their mental voice small and uncertain in a way that beings of their power should never sound. Probably not all of it, Elena admitted. But that's okay. Humans specialize in fixing things that can't be fixed and solving problems that don't have solutions. We'll figure something out. We will help, the collective declared, and their quantum signature suddenly blazed with something that made every psychic species in the fleet stagger. Genuine emotion. We will learn to be imperfect. We will remember how to fail. We will live again. One step at a time, Elena cautioned. Being alive is complicated. It's going to take practice. We have time, the collective replied, and for the first time in millions of years, They sounded like they meant it. The 7 constructs that had been approaching Rigel suddenly stopped, their configurations shifting as their controlling consciousness experienced something unprecedented, a change of heart. Weapons that had been charging to fire powered down. Defensive matrices designed to resist any attack opened themselves to whatever response the human fleet might choose. They were surrendering. Not in defeat, but in trust. Well, Commander Walsh observed from the Terra Defiance bridge, watching the tactical display with something approaching disbelief. That's new. Fleet status? Elena asked, her consciousness slowly withdrawing from the quantum interface and returning to her merely biological awareness. All ships report ready, but confused. Admiral Corks replied, I don't think anyone was prepared for the ancient enemy of all life to have an existential crisis. Elena laughed, the sound carrying relief and exhaustion, and the kind of giddy satisfaction that came from surviving something that should have killed everyone involved. Admiral, that's the most human thing I've heard all day. Over the following days, as news of the impossible resolution spread throughout the galaxy, the response was everything Elena had expected, and more. Some species called it a miracle. Others insisted it had to be an elaborate trap. The Celestial Dominion's philosophers declared it the most significant breakthrough in consciousness studies in the history of sapient thought. The humans, characteristically, just called it Tuesday. But as Elena stood once again on the observation deck of Nexus Prime, watching the impossible sight of architect constructs working alongside galactic fleet vessels to repair the damage their awakening had caused, she allowed herself a moment of pride. They had done it. They had actually done it. Ambassador, Chancellor Viridian materialized beside her, his crystalline form reflecting the lights of 1,000 ships working in harmony. I believe an apology is in order. When your species first made their promise to handle it, I confess I thought it was the boastful posturing of a young civilization. It was, Elena admitted with a tired smile. We had no idea what we were getting into, and yet you succeeded. You have given us something we thought was lost forever, hope for the impossible. Elena shrugged, the gesture containing all the casual confidence that had convinced the galaxy to bet everything on humanity's stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Chancellor, that's what humans do. We promise to handle it, and then we figure out how while we're doing it. And if you had failed, Elena's smile took on that dangerous quality that had started this entire adventure, then we would have tried something else. And if that failed, we would have tried again. Humans don't give up, Chancellor. We just get more creative. As she spoke, her communication device chimed with an incoming message. Elena glanced at the display, and her smile widened. What is it? Viridian asked. A request for assistance from the Andromeda Galaxy, Elena replied, her voice carrying the kind of enthusiasm that made experienced diplomats nervous. Apparently, they're having some trouble with an interdimensional invasion that's defying all conventional solutions. And your response? Elena Rodriguez, Ambassador of Earth and representative of humanity's indomitable spirit, activated her reply with the confidence of someone who had just convinced ancient quantum gods to learn how to live again. We'll handle it. Across the galaxy, humans were already volunteering for the mission, their minds buzzing with impossible solutions to problems they didn't yet understand. Alien scientists were running calculations on human methodologies that shouldn't work, but somehow always did. Military commanders were developing battle strategies based on the radical concept of organized confusion. The universe, it seemed, was about to discover that when humans promised to handle something, they meant everywhere and everything. And in the quantum realm where thought became reality, the Architect Collective felt something they hadn't experienced in millions of years of perfect existence. Excitement for what tomorrow might bring. They were learning to be human. It was the most wonderfully imperfect education in the history of consciousness itself. They listened as humans promised, we'll handle it, and watched miracles unfold. HFY. HFY Sci-Fi.